All right, boys. So it is 420 Dragon here. Today we're going to be doing the deep analysis. We're going to look at the top 8 deck lists from over the weekend, the two pauper challenges. So we're going to start with the one from Saturday. Let's see. So this one, I did see on Twitter, both of the top 2 players, I think they're playing the same list. Is that right? Let me see. So it looks like they're slightly different. This one has 2 DA, this one has 3 DA. This one has 1 FAMS main deck. They both have 1 FAMS main deck. This one is only 1 Chainers. 1 Chainers, 2 DA, 1 Cast Down. 4 Thoughts Card, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Augs, 17 lands. This one's on 18 lands. This one has a Thorn main deck. So, let's see. What is the cards that... So I guess this one cuts a DA for an extra land. Cuts a Chainers for like a Thorn. And... Is that it? This one has a spell. This one has 2 spell pierce. Oh, it cuts a consider. It cuts 2 considers in this one. With the extra lands, they cut a couple considers against us for having access to... Oh, they cut a mental note as well for having access to an agony warp and... What is the other thing? The dispel. Right? Yeah. So that looks like the main differences. It looks like this one is... Maybe this is teched out for the mirror. I did actually play this list on Sunday. Against list here. I think the Thorn is pretty good in the mirror match. I think having a little bit less mental notes and considers is honestly totally fine. I don't think I hate that approach at all. I think it's rather reasonable approach. You get some extra removal, you get more consistency with hitting your first land drops, which is going to make mulligan decisions a bit easier. And then in terms of the sideboard, this one's having 4 Nile spell bombs, whereas this one's having access to another Thorn and Stormbound Geist. I think this sideboard is way better in the mirror. I actually did end up facing against Lenny in the Sunday challenge and did kind of clap on him with Stormbound Geist and Thorn of the Black Rose. I think I actually did leave out Thorn in the matchup just because I thought he was going to have Stormbound Geist himself, but he did not. And I think that Nile Spellbomb just really does not do that much in the mirror. Like, it can be okay if you're able to, like, capitalize on the speed advantage that it gives you, but a lot of the time, it can just be, like, hard to actually get the speed advantage with it. You have to, like, have it at a proper time, and then it's really tricky to use it at the proper time because, you know, you can't, like, respond to your opponent casting Gurmag or Tolarian Terror with the Spell Bomb. It'll still cost 1 mana. So you have to, like, sort of preempt it and use it, like... when you think they've put their last card in the graveyard or when they're going to be able to cast it in their main phase. You need to use it before the main phase where they're able to cast it. So it's kind of tricky to use. And ultimately, I don't really think it's worth it because it's not that hard to just fill up again if they do end up spell bombing you. So I didn't even decide to bring it in the mirror matchup. But yeah, so that's the blue-black decks. I think this deck is... obviously performed very well in this day, and I think it's a pretty strong deck for sure. Let's see what we got here. Familiars. It's interesting. So we got 4 Faithful, 1 Dawnbringer, 4 Sunscape, 3 Sieg, 4 Drifter, 4 Mancer, 1 Brainstorm. It's interesting. 3 Ephem, 1 Ponder, 2 Preordain. That's interesting. That's pretty interesting. So he's going with 1 Ponder, 1 Brainstorm, and 2 Preordain. That's a pretty interesting setup. 1 Counterspell, 2 Prohib, 4 Snap, only 1 Modern Age, 2 DAs, 2 Flickers, 21 lands. He's going with the Skybridge Towers. I did actually play against this guy too. I think this was just in a league. I was playing Mono Red. But this is a pretty interesting list. He's got the Tormod's Crypt for, I guess that's for maybe... Blue-Black Terror. It's obviously pretty good against Cycle Storm 2, which is down here. We'll talk about that in a bit. But Yeah, I mean, it's pretty standard, I guess, outside of the interesting cantrip split here, and then the Skybridge Towers, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about the Skybridge Towers. I think it could be okay. And then the 1 TMA too is also kind of interesting. I guess he's opting for a more creature-based build with 3 Ephemerates and 3 Seagates, which I do like. I think that build is pretty sweet, and that was kind of where it was at when I was messing around with familiars. The last time I was messing around with straight-up blue-white was trying to go for more Ephemerate-focused builds, so I don't hate this sort of setup. So yeah, congrats to the Watch Wander. I think that's a pretty sweet deck. What is this? Bant Ephemerate. What is this? Okay, so it's basically just like a green ramp deck. You go into Goliath, Paladin, Avenging Hunter. You have Ephemerate late to dinners. Okay, this is kind of interesting. So he's just having the pretty basic land split. No fetches or anything. Just sort of relying on the green sources to get there. He's got 4 Abundant Growths, so that helps out a lot. Cop Reds, 2 Deglams, 4 Thermocars, 4 Asimos in the sideboard. That's interesting. So I guess the main deck plan is to just ramp up into these big initiative guys. There's actually no Cascaders, so it's just all around creatures that are good with Ephemerate. So I think that's a pretty interesting idea. I don't hate it. I think I did play against this deck once over the weekend. I think I was playing red. I think I was playing Coldotha red, so I mean, I don't think it's very strong in that matchup. I think that's definitely got to be one of the worst matchups for this deck. But this could definitely have an interesting game against Coggate and Blue-Black for sure, and even Affinity too. So that's a pretty interesting deck. Congrats to B1 Ast. I think that's a pretty nice innovative deck there. So we got Luca Yak with Mono Blue. This is Tolarian Terror build. Delvers, 4 Delver, 4 Spire Golem, 4 TT. Brainstorm Consider, 2 Force Spike, 1 Shore Up, 2 Spell Pierce, 4 Thought Scour. Okay. That's pretty interesting. It's 18 islands for the Modern Age. I think this looks like a pretty refined version. I think this is kind of a sweet deck, honestly. It's got the sort of clean threat base of Delvers, Spire Golems, TTs with the Modern Age, and then just a bunch of card selection with Brainstorms, Considers, Thought Scours, and you know, obviously the Blue Disruption, Counterspells. Echoing Truth is sort of the catch-all. If your opponent resolves a annoying permanent, you can Echoing Truth it. It's also good against Coldotha Rebirth. Spell Pierce, pretty good in the meta right now. Force Spike, pretty nice, especially for these mono blue strategies. You can get ahead with a well-placed Force Spike. And then Deep Analysis allows you to grind card advantage in the late game. And then in terms of sideboard, it's pretty straight up. The 4 Spreading Seas is actually pretty interesting, because that can be pretty good against Ponza if you like Spreading Seas, whatever land the Utopia Sprawl is on, it will fall off. What else is Spreading Seas good against? Any sort of bounce lane strategy. It's definitely good there. I guess it can be okay versus like mono red, because they don't really use colorless mana very well. So Spreading Seas can be pretty good there. But I'm not sure exactly what this is for. It is pretty interesting. I guess it's actually probably pretty good against the blue-black Terror decks, because they don't run many black sources. So if you're able to Spreading Seas their black source, that can really make it hard for them to cast their black cards. Alright, so then we got a Coggate stack here. Oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. So they're going with a Thraben and a Raffini's, as well as a Cortazar. So that's pretty interesting. We haven't really seen any of these cards in Coggate decks before. 4 Brainstorm, 4 Preordain, 4 Counter, 4 Strands, 1 Fumies, 4 Journey, 22 lands. Okay. So, yeah, it's pretty straight up. What did they cut for these creatures here? It looks like they cut like what is usually like Spell Pierce in the more traditional decks. It's either Spell Pierce or like Force Spike in that slot usually. I don't hate it. I think that's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting way to go with the deck. Sideboard's pretty straight up here. Standard stuff. Bunch of blasts, dust, arms. Then we got Ty Ruby playing Psycho Storm. Again, bro is just beast mode with this shit, man. He does not care. He does not care that you want to play Magic. He's here to cycle cards and do it a lot of times. We've seen that before. Then we got Hyson with his 4C Synth build. This is pretty interesting. 4 Glinthawk, 4 Skyfisher, G-Blast, DDs. Destroy Evil, I think, is a pretty interesting card in the meta. It's probably pretty well positioned right now, honestly. It's able to destroy the big creatures out of, what is it called? Blue-Black Terror. It's able to destroy any of the affinity threats. Able to destroy munitions or journeys or whatever. 3 Navigator's Compass, 4 Synth. This deck's pretty interesting. They do have the Omen of the Dead to go into the late game, but I think they do rely on this card pretty hard. This and like the burn spells, because they're really not having many threats. It's just the 4 Glinthawk, 4 Skyfisher, and if the Omen gets like countered or something, you're having like Synth, which can make threats. You're having Makeshift and Galv Blast, which can burn people out, but it can get a little bit sketchy if this deck has to go into the late game. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess if you're going to select this deck, you just definitely have to be very cautious about how you place your Omen of the Dead, and you want to make sure you can maximize the damage that your creatures are able to deal. And, yeah, that's specifically in slower matchups, like, you know, grindy matchups. Then in terms of sideboards, and the last Navigators, 2 Gorilla, 2 Spellbomb, 1 Destroy Evil, 4 Revoke, 2 Weather, 2 Dust, 1 Suffocating Fumes. So he's got a little bit of Hate for Affinity. It's not the most, it's only 4 cards. 2 Weathers. Oh, no, it's 8 cards, I'm trolling. So yeah, this is like quite a bit of Affinity Hate, actually. Yeah, no, this looks pretty reasonable. I guess he's got this thing is pretty good versus, oops. Versus, oh, what the fuck? Versus the, Tolarian Terror decks. So yeah, this looks pretty straight up, pretty nice deck. I like this deck by Hyson. I think it's a pretty cool deck. I do wonder if it's necessary to run 3 Navigator's Compass, because I feel like this card is so bad, but I mean, it does what it does, and it does it pretty well. It gains life, you bounce it with Glinthawk. Alright, so let's get into the other challenge here. Wow, it looks like Dimir Terror actually getting first and second place again here. That's pretty crazy. So this time we have 2 Augs for this one. What is this? This looks like, yeah, I think this is basically the list that we saw from, yeah. This is basically the list that we saw from, Lenny over here. This is the same list here. So that list got first, and then in second place, this looks like a little bit of a different take here than the ones that we saw in the last time. They have simply the 8 threats, no Augs or anything like that. They're actually going with 2 copies of foil, as well as 3 DAs, 2 cast downs, no chainers, man. It's kind of interesting. That can't be good for the mirror, but I guess they're not too worried about that. They're having 2 Spell Pierce, 4 Thought Scour, full 16 cantrips, 1 Fangs, and 18 lands here. I think I like the 18 lands. I'm not really sure. But I guess if you're going with 16 cantrips, maybe 18 lands is a bit overkill. 1 Disfigure, 2 Dispel, 4 Hydro, 3 Spellbomb, 3 Chainers, 1 Shrivel, 1 Arms. Yeah, I mean, I think this, I don't think I like this list as much as the other Blue-Black Terror lists we've seen. I think I like having the Augs main deck. It gives you protection against Edicts, and then I do also think that Edict is pretty well positioned in the meta. It's one of the best answers to Tolarian Terror. It does have Splash Hate against Bogles, which I think can be a pretty good deck in the meta right now. And yeah, so that's my take on this list. I don't think I like it very much. Foil can be okay, but I don't think the card's particularly good, to be honest. Alright, so we got Coggates here by Backoff. He's just going with the 10 threats. 4 Hawk, 4 Cat, 2 Jard. He's going with the Spell Pierce, 4 Counterspell. This is pretty standard stuff. We've seen it before. We'll see it again. 2 Relics. Yeah, this whole Coggate, this is basically the stock Coggate list. Nothing crazy going on there. And then we got red deck here. 1 Bushwhacker, 4 Swift, 4 Voldaren, 3 Kessig, 4 Chain. Yeah, this looks pretty standard. 2 Fire Blast. So this is like 2 Fire Blast variant. I I have been liking the 1 Fire Blast variant of red decks. I think that can be pretty strong, because if you ever draw 2 Fire Blasts, it just feels so bad. And it's also not the best thing to hit off of Reckless or Synth, especially in the early game. And especially if you've hit the other Fire Blast as well, it can just be kind of a headache and kind of a break sometimes. So I do kind of like the move to 1 Fire Blast that we've seen in some of these other lists, but definitely congrats to Rudberg. I think this guy plays a decent bit of the red deck, seems to be pretty strong with it. And then what do we got here? This is interesting. Okay, so they're just going with no Bushwhacker and only 2 Flame Breather. 2 Dart, 2 Fire Blast, 4 Reckless, 4 Bolt. Okay, and they're actually going with the 18th land. That's pretty interesting. I think that's not a bad choice, actually. This deck does kind of mulligan a lot for lands, so the 18th land could be necessary, to be honest. And then in terms of the sideboard, it's pretty standard. 2 End and 1 Electricity Split is kind of interesting. I guess having the instant speed against the Bushwhacker builds can be pretty important. Otherwise, they can just face you for like 8 or whatever with Bushwhacker Kuldoth, which can be pretty scary. So I do like this. Again, I'm not sure about the 2 Fire Blasts. It is pretty nice to have Fire Blast to kill people with, but when you're not killing people with Fire Blast, it is not very good of a card, to be honest. So yeah, and now let's see. We got Dimir Control. This is 4 Angler, 4 TT, 3 Consider. So it's not it's 15 cantrips for a Spell Pierce. So they're having a 3rd Spell Pierce, which is a little bit out of the ordinary. 2 DAs only, 18 lands, and then they're having Rotten Reunions in the board. 1 Chainers, 2 Fangs in the board, 1 Fangs main. Stormbound Geist. I do think the Stormbound Geist is pretty nice in the mirror, because a lot of people are going to be bringing in the Chainers, and Stormbound Geist completely shits on Chainers. 4 Blasts, 1 Dispel. Yeah, I mean, I don't hate this list, honestly. I do kind of like the list with Augur's main deck, just because I think that having the Edict Protection in the main is pretty nice, and it's also just another threat, which can sometimes get there if you needed to. It's a blocker against red decks. I think Augur is just a pretty good card in general. We got Jer James. He's going with his classical fairies strategy here. So he's got 4 Delvers, whole fairies package, 12 fairies, 8 ninjas, 4 mutagenics, 4 ponder, 4 counterspell, 1 deprive, 3 snap, 4 Elven Mind. So that's interesting that they decide to go with ponder as the cantrip of choice. 1 Halimar Depths in the sideboard is pretty interesting. I'm not sure exactly what that's for. 2 Mantle of Tides. I guess this is for like maybe Coggate or other decks that are making flyers, where you really want your flyers to be able to, you know, contend, and 1/1 body is just not very big. So if your opponent's having Glint Hawks or Squadron Hawks or whatever, you're going to want to have the Mantle of Tides to outclass their creatures. They got the Viridian Longbow. That's probably pretty good against Coggate, actually. So I don't hate that. 3 Curse of Chains is good for killing Guardian. 1 Echoing Truth. It's a nice catch-all for random stuff. Piracy Charm. Not sure exactly what this is for, to be honest. I don't really know what that's for, to be honest. Yeah, but, you know, looks pretty standard, classical stuff. And let's see, we got Dimir Control by Chichio Geyer. 4 Angler, 4 TT, 4 Brainstorm, 2 Consider. So this guy's going with the 16 cantrip, and he's playing the Modern Age. This is pretty interesting. So it looks like this is the only Modern Age version that actually made the top 8 on either of the days. So it looks like this sort of version has performed the worst out of all of them, at least on this weekend. But I'm not sure. Maybe it's just a low sample size. Maybe it's just there weren't many people playing the Modern Age version. I'm not really sure what I think about the Modern Age version. I do think it's probably pretty good in the mirror, just because it's hard for these decks to actually block flyers. But then again, with the Fangs in the main deck, you can kind of just race, and it's not really about the flyers as much as it is about getting to the 5/5s and winning the 5/5 war. So I'm not really sure what I think about the Modern Age. I guess it can be pretty good against the other decks with flyers like this stuff, or Glint Hawk decks or whatever. But then again, it is pretty slow. You have to wait a couple turns for it to come online, and it's not really good in your nut draws where you're like cantrip, Thought Scour or whatever, play 3 5/5s. Like, it doesn't really do anything in those draws. So, I mean, I guess I probably don't think it's very good. Like, it just doesn't really, I don't know. It doesn't help the main plan of the deck, which is to make big-ass dudes and make them fast. Because if you're playing, like, 1 mana 5/5s on turn 4, it's a lot worse than playing 1 mana 5/5s on turn 3 or turn 2. Like, the earlier you're able to get the 5/5s down, it actually matters quite a bit. So, I do think the Modern Age version is probably not as good as the other versions. And then in terms of sideboard, it's pretty straight up. 3 Stormbound guys here. He actually has the 3rd DA in the sideboard here, so it's pretty interesting. Another Spell Pierce to go up to 3. 2 Spellbomb. I mean, I really don't think Spellbomb is very good in the mirror match. I think it's probably pretty good versus Affinity, but I don't think it's very good in the mirror match. So personally, if I was going to play this deck, I would not be bringing in Spell Pierce in the mirror. I would probably be bringing in like these 6, this one, and a Spell Pierce. Probably cut like TMAs and Fangs and Fumies. Yeah. But yeah, that's going to be all for this week's Deep Analysis. Thanks for watching, and take it easy. Make sure to click subscribe.